9.
8.
7.
Hold on, sorry guys.
That's you.
Sorry, give me a
That's
second.
you.
Stumped.
That was my
You were
cue.
stumped.
That was my. I was stumped. Which one comes next? Let me do this again. 9.
8.
7.
6.
5.
4.
3.
2.
1.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Slash Filmcast. I'm David Chen, and with me are
Devendra Hardawar.
And Jeff Kanata.
welcome to the show, everyone. On today's episode of the podcast, we got some what we've been watching, and then we're going to move on into an in-depth review. This week, we'll be reviewing Bad Education, the new Corey Finley movie that's streaming right now on HBO in the U.S. You can find more episodes of this podcast at slashfilmcast.com. Email us at slashfilmcast@gmail.com. So before we get into today's festivities, gents, we are recording this in the midst of a global pandemic, and I'd like to check in with y'all just to see how you're doing. We're recording this right now on Saturday, May 2nd, although the release date of this episode's a little bit later than that. But yeah, how are you guys doing this week? Devendra, how's your week been? How's surviving this week been?
It's been a hellish week, a lot of work. I don't know why all of a sudden, even though I'm not commuting to work anymore and not taking meetings in the city, all of a sudden my work time has vacuumed up so much of my life, but it's not on purpose, I promise. The next week is also going to be hell. But I think we're looking at a path forward to move out of New York. Hopefully Georgia and all the crazy rules, everything happening there, hopefully it doesn't go too bad because we found cool places we want to kind of end up eventually. So that's my plan. Maybe move within the next month or two.
That's
exciting. Amazing, man.
Yeah, that's
Wow.
exciting, dude.
Yep. And it's also very hard to kind of do that safely. So we'll see. I keep getting messages from Delta and the airline saying, hey, you can travel. We've definitely, made flying safer. And they're trying to book people by not booking middle seats and spreading out passengers and stuff. But we'll see. We'll see how it all goes.
Man, that's it. Just the logistics of moving, especially across states, is a nightmare and a headache anytime. Yep. But I just had a buddy move into a new place in the same town, and they did movers, and then they had the movers just load all their boxes into the garage of the new place, and then they left them there for 3 days just to be safe, before moving in. It's just it just seems like such a headache. I feel for you, man.
It is basically like doing, it's like doing a whole heist plan or something. I got to get the stuff from here, over there. You get these people here. Team A is going to move the boxes. Team B going to move the child. We have two cats. Oh, man. Going to go under the seats. It's a whole thing. Hopefully it'll go okay. I hope in a month or two that at least safe travel and being very careful about how you move around is going to be a little better. The other choice is driving to Georgia from New York, which I've done before, but I would not want to do with 2 cats and a baby. So we'll see how it goes.
Sounds like a script.
Basically, no pandemic scripts, please. I think once we're out of this, anybody who's sitting at home writing their pandemic, masterpiece, please don't. Let's move on.
So many. I'm sure there's gonna be so many rom-coms about trying to kiss with masks on. Oh,
yeah.
Oh, the stories will tell.
Oh,
I think one question, though, a legit question. I agree with you that many of us will never want to return back to this phase in our lives again, through popular culture or anything like that. We're just hey.
Our children will wonder, why do you always have a month of food, stored in the basement?
I hope they wonder. I hope it seems like a strange affectation and not the new way of life.
Right. Right. But I think there is a legit question of how pop culture is going to deal with all this. When we go see movies again in a year from now, because by all things that I've read from experts, this is something that's going to be with us for years, right? This dealing with this is going to be something that's with us for years. It might not be we're in quarantine for years, but there may be stops and starts to the social distancing, starts and stops to the lockdown measures until a vaccine is made. Which, by the way, there may never be a vaccine. There's plenty of things that we don't have vaccines for, and so. Years from now, 1 or 2 years from now, when we've burned through all the media that was made before the pandemic, how much do we want the stuff we watch to reflect the reality that we live through.
Yeah.
I assume
Yeah.
it's going to be a lot. I assume that there's going to be things that talk about it or reflect it in a meaningful way, and I'm curious like what that will look like. Obviously, that's not. It's the topic that we talk about here on the podcast. There's obviously far more important things happening right now, but that is something I wonder will characters be dealing with social distancing in sitcoms that we watch? In cop dramas and so on.
I
feel
just
like-
want to see things paint a better future, basically, because we've spent so much time with post-apocalyptic pop culture. Because like we have taken like all the things we're feeling, all the anxiety we're feeling in the world, terrorism and how countries are dealing with that, and global inequality and all sorts of things, and we've taken that to the logical end of the end of civilization. But now that we've actually previewed something, that could potentially end civilization, where do we go from here? Hopefully more positive. I don't know.
I would like that too, but I think you're right, Dave. I even just watching television now,
Yeah.
it feels like I'm looking at a window into a world that like watching an old movie or something. It's not, there's. I always, when I watch things, have a weird preference that I've never really voiced before. But I always prefer a movie to say when they, it puts a chyron up at the bottom of the screen to place a movie. I always appreciate it when it goes today. Instead of like 2009, because then
Just a reminder.
Five years later, after 2009, you go, oh, this feels old. Instead of like, we're trying to place it now. A movie will show you a flashback or something, and then it'll come back to where the main story is set, and it'll say like today or now. And like you can't do that anymore because it seems like a crazy misunderstanding of what now could possibly be. It's not now, that no one is doing the things in your show or movie now. No one's doing it. So is weird to me. And also the wife and I last night decided to check out the first episode of Upload, and literally the very first shot of that show is a panning shot in a subway car across in the future, right? In the near future. And it pans across a guy wearing a face mask, like you see all over the place now in real life. And my wife and I both audibly gasped.
Yep.
Because it
people
was like
crowded, jam-packed in the subway
Yes.
car, and the people in masks. Yep.
It was so prescient, and like, how is it possible that they could be showing us a reality that we're actually living in? Because everything we're watching is showing us this weird, bizarro world that doesn't exist right now. It really generated a reaction from us that was shock.
It's also been interesting to read about how productions are going to go back, and there's going to be a lot of different measures taken when it comes to producing things. I don't have any knowledge. I'm just speculating, and from reading in Variety and Deadline and things like that. But people have considered things like sets that have no more than 50 people, or it might change and shape the actual stuff that gets written. You might not write a thing with 50 extras anymore because you can't execute it, or you'll need to execute it using visual effects. And I'm kind of interested to see what is going to happen with the impact of this in pop culture. But I agree with you, Jeff, that it is fascinating to look back on. I think because for me, it's mostly cringing. It's mostly, hey, we're in this scenario now where we're social distancing, and we're certainly not touching anybody else outside of our family units. And when you see people gathering together in rooms in tightly packed rooms, or shaking hands or hugging on TV and film, it is very jarring. Like at first, when this first started, my insides were like screaming, like, "No, don't do that! It's not safe." Now I've gotten more used to it, but it is a kind of it is this kind of adjustment you have to make to like this life we're living with is so far removed from the media that we're watching right now, because the media we're watching was made in a different era.
I do like what you said before, though, and it seems like a very big silver lining for me personally, that we might be getting a whole lot of movies like the ones I like It's just my dinner with Andre all the way down.
That is literally the one silver lining of this whole fiasco.
2 people in a place, maybe not even that close together, just talking. Make those movies. I will devour them.
Yeah. So anyway, it'll be interesting to see the impact on pop culture. Devindra, how are you doing this week?
I'm okay. I just did my thing.
Yeah, you checked in with him already.
I
You're
apologize. I meant to
How are
check in
you
with,
doing?
I
How are
meant
you
to check in
doing?
with
I
Jeff
think-
first.
I think that says a lot, though, Dave. How you're doing?
Let me do that again.
No,
Jeff,
leave that in.
No, I'm not leaving that in. I will leave in a lot of things, like me breaking up, laughing uncontrollably. But
You got to leave that in, dude.
I'm not going to leave that in.
That's a window.
Sorry, I apologize for that, Devindra.
Yeah, it's okay.
Jeff.
Jeff cannot remember what happened 10 minutes ago. It's perfect.
Jeff, how are you doing this week?
Dude, I'm doing great, Dave. Never been better. No, honestly, I had a pretty amazing week. Just professionally, like we had the first anniversary of the Dungeon Run last week,
Congrats.
and it was incredible. The fans put together like this tribute show for us, and a video and a book, and like all just generated by the fans. It was amazing. So that's cool. And there's all these bright spots. I don't want people to think that there aren't bright spots. It's just, wow, man, the slog through the tunnel that doesn't have a light at the end of it is the hardest part. And I think every week we talk about just it doesn't change, right? We don't know anything still, despite the fact that just yesterday I got an email from my son's school saying, "Hey, we're going to reopen in 2 weeks." So that seems optimistic, and I appreciate the optimism. But my wife and I are now struggling with this idea of whether we allow my son to go back to school or not. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I saw this tweet recently about how we experience time. It is interesting that didn't March feel like it lasted forever, but April felt like it went extremely quickly. I don't know if you all felt that way. Like March, I felt like every day was an ordeal.
Yeah.
And then
Somehow
April,
standing still, like being at home, has sped things up quite a bit.
and then April was just like, whoop, it's gone. Like I barely remember April at all. So
I feel like the weeks go by faster, and I don't understand that. Being home, it should feel slower, right? But it feels way faster. Like I can't keep up with.
Because there's no
the
distinction,
days.
probably, right?
Yeah.
There's little distinction between our days, so it's all just our brains can't process that. It's
I do have some techniques that I have developed for dealing with that time compression. I have a calendar where I cross off the day every day. Like I have like on my desk, I have a calendar.
It's
and
just
then
hanging there, kitty, every day.
Yeah,
Like,
hanging there, kitty,
I've,
every day,
hanging in there.
crossing out the calendar. Yeah.
Dave is like, I have been innovating some outside the box ideas of keeping track of the day.
Yep.
One of which is called this thing called a calendar.
Yes.
Have you?
Also, a paper calendar in case our global systems fail and everything goes to hell. Yeah.
I'm
Perfect.
also just saying, just the physical act of crossing off the day, and then you, at the end of the month, you look at all the days you crossed off. It's like, oh, that's time that passed by
Yep.
in my life.
I
You
did
know?
something.
Yep.
Yeah.
Here's the thing that sums up my situation. I saw this piece in The Onion that I just thought was brilliant. I'm gonna read a little bit of it, but the headline is, "Man not sure why he thought most psychologically taxing situation of his life would be the thing to make him productive."
so good.
And the article says, quote, "Admitting that a highly contagious, deadly pandemic had done little to stoke his creativity, local man Michael Ayers confided to reporters Wednesday that he wasn't sure why he had imagined the most stressful situation he had ever experienced would be the thing that finally made him more productive. Despite my high hopes, the most devastating crisis of my life hasn't turned out to be the catalyst I needed to meet all of my long-held personal goals," said Ayers, who added that he had no idea what he was thinking when he told himself that being furloughed from his job and enduring a sustained period of emotional isolation would be just what he needed to start eating better, acquaint himself with world cinema, and get a jump start on the novel he'd always wanted to write, end quote.
So funny.
Too good. Too good.
I think that's something I've been dealing with a lot, is obviously all three of us are making lots of content, quote unquote, for the internet, and it has been really devastating to my motivation to do that. Just because it just feels like who cares? Like all this stuff is like unimportant. I do a podcast with C. Robert Cargill where he says something he said recently on the podcast called Right Along was he said like one of the ways he reconciles what he does given the current situation is that like he is an entertainer when times are good and a distraction when times are bad, basically.
Yes,
Yeah.
like,
that's a good way to put it. Yeah.
and it's like and if you have that perspective, that's healthy to have that perspective, I think, but it's also just like very demotivating to me, and so that's just been what I'm struggling with. Like we've been doing this podcast for so long that it's like, okay, well, it's not really doesn't require a lot of out of the box thinking to put out another episode of this podcast. You know what I mean?
This is like breathing.
Not like inventing the calendar.
Not like inventing the cross off calendar system that I developed. So it's like pretty second nature to us to do this. But some of the other stuff, like making YouTube videos or making some of my other podcasts, it's more of a challenge. And so that's what I've been struggling with.
I've been having a really hard time focusing, and I was just reading an article instead of working the other day about how college professors actually are having a hard time reading. Like reading, they're noticing it in their students having a hard time reading at all, just focusing enough to read anything. And professors themselves are having a hard time getting through papers and reading things. We are just as a species having a hard time quieting our minds enough to read. And I know that reading was already dying, and just feels like so depressing to me to think that this is how reading dies. Is that we all are so stressed that all we can do is just, watch TikTok as the world expires. That's about it. That's about as much as we can focus on.
Yeah. I will say one other piece from The Onion that really, I think, helps to capture my week. I mean, in Seattle, our governor announced a multi-phase plan for reopening the economy that seems overall pretty cautious and good. I'll be curious to see what it is like in implementation, but I did see another piece from The Onion that I felt like really characterized my level of despair about the situation, which is the headline is "Protesters Demand States Reopen, Notice Spike in Coronavirus Cases, Infuriate Them by Locking Down Again." And it says here in the article, pushing back against what they viewed as tyrannical measures, protesters across the country took to the streets Tuesday to hold demonstrations demanding that states reopen, notice a spike in coronavirus cases, and then infuriate protesters by once again locking down. We urge these governors to immediately loosen restrictions on large gatherings, witness an influx of cases, and piss us off further by once more putting in place restrictions, said protester Allison Driscoll.
Yeah, their demand is to do all those steps. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so anyway, we've seen a lot of protesters. Certainly, the lockdown has not gone perfectly. There's definitely things that states could have done better. I'm not saying they did an awesome job, but overall, I think like reopening the economy too early will. The thing you don't want to do is reopen the economy 2 or 3 times, and it seems like there's a possibility that that's what we're heading towards. Given
I don't know, man. I honestly at this point don't even know what the best plan is, because maybe we are in this cyclical thing where you reopen and then we close down and then we reopen and then we close down. And
it's cyclical. Like even if we don't get a vaccine, like there is the idea that we will eventually have some sort of immunity. Like herd immunity will come from people who survived. Hopefully, that's what I'm hoping for, is that we can come to some sort of solution like that. Otherwise, I'm treating this like okay, all you people dreaming about living on Mars for a living, this is it. You live on Mars, you can't go outside. There's no there's no, magnetic protection. You're facing radiation every day. Every step outside in Mars is death. So, for now, I'm treating it like, okay, we're in a crazy situation, but this is also like things we've thought about for a while, like how we want to progress as a species. So I think we could do it. I think I'm a little more hopeful.
I never thought about it that way. We're basically in total recall.
Yeah.
So anyway,
it's cool. We're in total recall. This is awesome.
Yeah,
everything's great.
Everything is great. Nothing bad happened to anybody in total recall. All right. Well, anyway, wanted to check in with you folks just as I do every week. And if you are out there listening, we hope you are staying safe, staying healthy, doing what you can reasonably to flatten the curve. Let's get to what we've been watching this week. So I had a chance to watch a couple things. First of all, I had a chance to watch this movie called well, actually, let's talk about something happy. Let's talk about a fun thing, which is the Parks and Recreation special. So people might know that Parks and Recreation did a special this week to benefit a COVID-related charity, and I watched it last night, and it was absolutely delightful. Devendra, I think you saw this as well, right?
I have not seen
you
it,
haven't
but
seen
I
it,
will
okay.
tell you, as I was preparing to do like upload interviews and stuff, Greg Daniels let slip like, oh, by the way, we're also, we're doing things like Zoom and bringing the Parks and Rec crew together, and immediately his PR people were like, because this was like, several days before he announced it, and then like we got follow up like legal threatening letters, just be like, do not tell anybody about this happy Zoom special. Thank you very much. So how did you enjoy it, Dave?
It was really, really good. It was what it is this is a special that came out many years after the final episode of Parks and Recreation, and you're basically just checking in with the characters from the show. Everyone is in character, but they are all going through the situation that we're going through. So like it's in universe that they're quarantining, and you're just checking in with these folks that you knew and loved from the show, and it was just like really uplifting. It was funny. They managed to weave in messages about like how you should wash your hands and stay at home and things like that into the actual script itself, and it came together super quickly. So this is like the best of what quarantine TV can be, in my opinion. It just everyone's making this from home. They're recording it on their own like cameras at home, and people are editing it together, presumably at another location, and it was great. It was great. If you were, and just to be clear, I fell off Parks and Recreation at the end. I thought it was a brilliant show. Didn't watch the last couple seasons of it.
Oh, really?
The last couple seasons
Did
are
you
great.
see the finale?
Well, nope, I didn't. So I'm
Oh my
I'm
God.
not, okay,
Finale.
all right,
That's
all right,
perfect.
all right. I
Yeah.
gotta
How
go
dare
back.
you?
You guys are angry at me now.
Yeah. I thought we had all agreed that is a perfect show, and like I thought we had all talked about it. But if you want some joy in your life, Dave, like that final season, it's better than like the one before it, but the finale I think is perfect. Yeah.
Cool. I am now motivated to check it out. But my point being that I hadn't watched the last couple seasons, and I still really enjoyed it. I mean, some of the relationships and people who are married now and whatever, that was a shock to me. But everything else was really a delight. Because
I have to say, by the way, I really like the way late night hosts are taking advantage of all this too. Like this is basically the format we're seeing in a lot of different things. Conan, I think, is doing the best of all this. Like I love his video interviews.
It's so interesting to me. I don't think you guys watch Bill Maher, but I am so surprised and kind of appreciate how he is handling his monologue. At the beginning, so many people are just sort of just doing it and looking into the camera and letting it be. Bill Maher's like, no, man, this monologue needs laughter. I'm going to lean into the canned laughter thing and have literal laugh track during my monologue. And then they cut to clips that are just ridiculous, like an animated crowd of people all laughing, or like old stock footage of people from the 50s all laughing in the theater. And that's, I don't know, there's something kind of charming and effective about just sort of being like, hey, it's all fake, who cares, but you need to hear laughter at this part because this is where the people in the studio audience would be laughing. So this is what, I don't know, it's just interesting to see the different approaches is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, that's a Parks and Recreation special. I believe it's actually available online right now, and they're
it's on YouTube.
Yeah, they're matching donations up to $500,000 for what is it? Let me see. Hold on, let me do this again. I want to have the right information. They are matching. Okay, here we go. So that's the going great. So that's the Parks and Recreation special. It's actually available right now online on YouTube. You can watch the full special online, and they are matching donations up to $500,000 for feedingamerica.org. So I'd recommend you check out the special. It's great. It's a lot of fun. Okay. Also, I had a chance to watch this movie called True History of the Kelly Gang. Have you guys heard of this movie, True History of the Kelly Gang? We talked about this as a potential review. I texted with Devendra about maybe reviewing this. This is the newest film by Justin Kurzel. Justin Kurzel directed the Assassin's Creed movie with
Which
Michael
we all
Fassbender.
remember and love, right?
Unfortunately, I remember
Yeah.
it. Woo! I was so excited for that movie. So excited.
Even his Macbeth too. Like, man,
I still
okay.
remember Jeff's comments on the Macbeth review.
Yeah.
It was pretty brutal, and rightfully so. I mean, Macbeth, I think, was actually a gorgeously photographed film. You know, like the visuals were really memorable, but the way that the movie used language felt like not a way to honor Shakespeare's original text.
Yeah.
So
Humble
the thing
for
is,
Macbeth. Yeah.
love Justin Kurzel as certainly as a visual stylist. His visuals are quite frequently arresting, but haven't enjoyed his last two movies. I did like the Snowtown Murders. I don't think have any of you watched the Snowtown Murders?
I did. That was chilling.
That was really good. That's like from the 3 movies I've seen of his, that's my favorite one. Or the 4 movies I've seen now of his, that's my favorite one. I'd really recommend it. It's about a series of, I guess they're serial murders that took place in a small town, and really upsetting. And there's visuals from that movie that will haunt me forever. But True History of the Kelly Gang is a new movie by Justin Kurzel. It's based on a novel. It tells the story of Ned Kelly, a notorious Australian bushranger who lived in the 1870s. And the style of the movie is very interesting. Even though the movie kind of takes place in the 19th century, it's shot in a very modern style. Like Marie Antoinette is a good comparison if you've seen that movie, where it took place long in the past, but it in fact uses modern sensibility for its storytelling. I wasn't a huge fan of this movie. It's a movie that I feel like didn't add up to more than the sum of its parts. I think primarily because it relies on a lot of knowledge of Ned Kelly that I didn't have. Like if you don't know anything about Ned Kelly, I just feel like this movie isn't a great way of explaining to you why he is the way, or why he became who he became, or what motivated him, or anything like that. But it does have a lot of really good things that I can recommend it for. First of all, it's got George McKay, who played Schofield in 1917. Now, I think we were all really impressed with his performance in 1917, right? Jeff, I think you were particularly a fan.
Oh, very much.
This is George McKay Unchained. You know, he is just over the top. This is like his
multiple cuts. It's crazy. You've never seen him in such a way.
It's like his version of like Wesley Snipes' Simon Phoenix from Demolition.
Oh,
you know, like he goes completely bonkers, over the top in this movie. While at the same time, like much of the performance is also like he's like simmering with a lot of emotion underneath the surface. And if you want to see George McKay just really go all out, like it's a complete polar opposite performance from his performance in 1917, where like he was so reserved in that movie, right? He was bottling everything up, not revealing anything about his life, his family life, like. So it's just from a pure acting study perspective, it's fascinating to see George McKay do a completely different thing. You also see Russell Crowe in this movie, who has completed the transition to Santa Claus-like character in terms of both persona and physicality. So he makes an appearance in this movie as well. And Nicholas Hoult is a raging asshole in this movie that's just really fun to watch.
That's kind of his thing now, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like between this and like The Favorite, like he's very good at that.
Okay, yeah, that's right. It's very similar to his performance in The Favorite. There's an interrogation scene in this movie that is very memorable. I won't say anything about it. You'll know it when you get to it, but almost worth watching for that scene alone. So it's not like the movie's terrible or anything like that. It's just like, you have all these great ingredients. You have the visuals that Justin Kurzel is known for, his really wild editing style that is just kind of very off kilter and sets you ill at ease. You got George McKay, Russell Crowe, Nicholas Hoult doing a great job. And ultimately, it was a movie that felt like, I didn't love it. I didn't love it. But there's still a lot to check out, a lot to recommend it if you're interested in any of the stuff I just said. The movie is True History of the Kelly Gang. And it is a movie that you can rent right now on video on demand. It was supposed to have a small theatrical release. Obviously, that didn't happen. So now you can rent it on digital. Finally, I wanted to give a shout out to Dave, the
Yes.
FX slash Hulu
Gotta give a shout out to
original
yourself.
series. Yeah,
Yeah.
Not to myself, but to Dave.
Nobody else is gonna do it, right? You know what I'm saying?
Thanks, Jeff. This is this is a show that I felt like really found its voice in its first season. Not every episode was a hit, but the last 2 episodes, I thought,
Masterpieces.
were amazing 1-2 punch.
Masterpieces.
Yeah, I mean, just the episode 9 was an emotional wall up. Episode 10 does something that's just so bold. I'm not even going to reveal anything about it, but it's just like, wow, it takes a lot of confidence to do what they did in episode 10.
Dude.
And it's great. I would recommend you check it out. The whole thing's
incredible. The thing that I love, dude, I think Dave is one of the best shows around right now. I mean, the thing that's so amazing to me about the show is that it's about a guy who thinks he's like a generational talent.
like a Kanye West style talent.
Yes.
Literally, he invokes Kanye West.
The show sort of demonstrates why. It's extraordinary to me that he like form kind of mirrors message in a weird way. Like it's a show about a guy who's narcissistic and overconfident, and then the show sort of reinforces why he should be narcissistic and overconfident, but also pokes fun at it. And
because the show is so good, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
It is doing exactly what he says he's doing. Like the show itself is doing what he as a character says he's doing with his art.
Yes.
He says in that final episode, I lure people in through absurdity. And that's what like the first few episodes of the series are of the season is just this kind of wacky fun comedy. And then the back half of the season is like, oh, guess what? We actually have some shit to say.
Yeah.
And it's really important. There's these episodes that take huge swings. You talk about the last 2, which are amazing. But even before that, the back half of the season, there's whole episodes that are kind of devoted to side characters in a really brilliant way that you would see like 4, 5, 6 seasons into a show's lifetime, but they're doing it in like episode 5.
Yeah.
It's kind of wild. And how good a rapper he is and how late into the season he goes before really doing it. It's so cool how what this show is shooting for. And I want to talk about that last episode so bad because he does this brilliant thing where he gets away with saying horrible things by making fun of how horrible the things are and saying, if you just listen to the rest of it, it all makes sense. It all ties back in together. And you never have to actually hear the rest of it, but he just has people who have heard the rest of it going, wow, it really ties into it's so smart and funny and like a meta commentary. It's, dude, and then the mic drop of the last moment of the last episode is so rad that I was like cheering in my house.
Yeah, it was really good. It was really good. Yeah, I agree.
It's such a good show.
It's a great show.
Get over how good it is for like it just is this. You start watching in the first episode, you're like, oh, this is a funny, fun, kind of clever idea, and then it turns into a work of art. And I think that's exactly what he's saying his songs do. You know?
Yeah, I completely agree. This is a show that came out of nowhere, and watched the first episode, and I was like, this is really funny. And then, I agree, Jeff. At the end, it's like, hey, we actually have things to say. We have big swings we want to take, and I think more of them land than don't. Devindra, you watch any of this show yet?
I have not. I've heard good things. I've heard you guys gush about it. It's just not something I've had time for, but I'm looking forward to it. Yeah.
There are scenes where in the middle of the season where he's like sitting in a record executive's office, and they're like, "Oh man, it's really funny. It's My Dick Sucks is the name of your song, and it's so funny." He's like, "Yeah, but do you get it?" He's like, "Yeah, of course. It's funny." He's like, "No, I don't think you do," and I think that's kind of what the show is saying is like I'm trying to work on a level here that isn't what you see on the surface, and the whole show is doing that. It's like no, this show is about a dude who's making fun of his dick but that's just the hook to get you into like talking about some serious shit. Like it's dude, I think the world of what is being attempted and how well it is succeeding. It's extraordinary.
Agreed. You can watch the entire first season of Dave on Hulu right now. You know, this is interesting. I read about this and this whole FX on Hulu thing. That on FX the show was getting a few 100,000 views per episode, but on Hulu it was clocking 5 million, which is huge, like massive numbers.
I think that whole thing is such a smart move, right? Like it is really highlighting a lot of content that people normally would not have cared about as much. I'd say. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think the head of FX has said like there is a huge market penetration into people's living rooms of FX already, so it's like the next area of growth is streaming, and so yeah, I think it's certainly been great for that show, and I'm so glad people have been able to check it out. Again, the show is Dave. It is on Hulu right now.
But at the risk of beating a dead horse here, I
okay.
I don't understand why FX isn't spoken in the same sentence as HBO, Netflix. I think there's an argument to be made that FX has a better slate. It can go toe to toe with any network. I mean, you talk about over its history. You talk about The Shield, Justified. I can't even. There's like
Atlanta.
Yes, there's like show after show after show after show. What's that horror show? The horror that people were really loving.
American Horror Story.
Yeah, American Horror Story.
Yeah, they had all of his stuff too. Like, yeah, it may be a consistency thing, or like I don't know if every show has been as good, but like, yeah, you look at FX compared to AMC, which I think has done a good job of selling itself as like prestige network TV in a way, even though they have a lot of not so great shows too. Mad Men helped them. Certainly, Walking Dead has helped them. But yeah, it's all really confusing.
Also, wasn't The Americans FX as well?
Yes, The Americans.
The Americans Damages.
Archer.
Damages in its first couple seasons.
Dude, Damages is so good.
Sons of Anarchy, Better Things. So
Better Things is great.
A lot of great shows. My guess, Jeff, is it has to do with like the fact that FX is on basic cable, and HBO is like a premium network that you need to pay extra money for. So that's my guess as to why. Yeah, Baskets. But I agree.
Legion?
I agree that's why. I mean, I agree that the shows can go toe to toe. They are really great, and
I'm gonna keep going. Terriers.
I mean, it's a network for people who love terriers too, right? Like
Fargo,
like stuff that movie nerds tend to like, but it maybe is harder to get like to mainstream press. Like talking to people about The Shield, and they're like, that cop show with the bald guy, that's a show you love so much. Like I think the penetration of pop culture is a little different for FX. I don't know.
Yeah,
I'd take FX in a Pepsi challenge against HBO any day of the week, man. I would.
Yeah.
All right, that's what I've been watching this week. Let's move on. Hold on, let me do this again. I'll just leave. We had a perfect gap there, and I just should have just went right on. So hold on. All right, let's move on in terms of what we've been watching to Devindra. What have you been watching?
I've been checking out Never Have I Ever, the new Mindy Kaling show on Netflix. And let me just say, I love the show. Absolutely love it. It is about an Indian American girl in high school who's kind of dealing with her, typical high school life. It's a funny show in the way a lot of Mindy Kaling stuff has been, but I think overall this is the best thing she's done. It's really funny. It's really poignant. It's just framed in a really interesting way. Let me just say it, like, this is a show, it's a comedy, but there's also like this underlying sense of grief. Like, we're introduced to this girl, Devi, as somebody who is kind of a high school outcast because her father died during a public performance, when she was in band. And then she lost the use of her legs. This is a comedy. she lost the use of her legs as like a psychological reaction to that, and then like the series starts when she's like beginning to recover and coming back to the school. So it's not just like you are the outcast in high school. It's like every terrible thing that could have happened to you in high school has happened to you, and you're trying to just deal with that. And I found that all just kind of interesting because it remains funny and light and colorful. It's set in it's set in California. It has that like bounciness of a California comedy, but yeah, there it just has so much going for it. Hold on, I'm looking up a name because there's actually a tennis star. There's just like the way they frame this thing. Because they do this thing where it's this tennis star who recounts her entire story. Sorry. And his name just escapes me right now. There we go. John McEnroe. There we go. Why? Okay.
Can you take it back a little bit?
Yeah, I will. And what's really interesting is that the framing device for the show is just so wild. It is it's the story of a teenage girl's life narrated by hothead tennis star John McEnroe. A very, an older white guy, which
John McEnroe?
Is it John McEnroe? Yeah, John McEnroe. But it's also like, man, his commentary, like he's basically giving us like tennis play-by-play commentary of her life. And it's so weird and it's so good. And they kind of change that up even later on in the series. I won't say who, but just this idea of like, these sports idols narrating a kid's life, I think is really interesting. This show has a lot going for it. I love all the characters. It is a show that, is primarily concerned about teen girls and what they're dealing with, but I think it's accessible to everybody. It has some of the like romantic tropes you'd expect, but it's funny, it's sharp. All the characters are great. I love her friends. There's just so much going on here, and it's a show that will like unexpectedly drop an emotional wallop on you. And yeah, I'm just really interesting. It's interesting to me to see like the state of things, talking about like Indian American kids growing up here with immigrant parents and how they're dealing with that. I think among all the shows that have done that, this one feels the most like real and the most modern and interesting. There's just so much going on here. So I'm really digging it. If you start the show, I think you won't be able to stop. Like my wife and I, we binged this thing in a couple days. So yeah, heavily recommended.
That's Never Have I Ever. It's on Netflix right now. Devindra, what else have you been watching?
Also, another Netflix show. I just want to quickly talk about Black AF, the new Kenya Barris show. He made a big high-profile jump away from ABC, where he was doing Blackish, which was very successful, to Netflix, which basically paid him a crap ton of money. I think it was something like crazy amount. Was it like close to 100 million? I don't know. But he is on contract at Netflix to make a couple shows. Black AF is basically him remixing Blackish and telling it with like no censors. So it's a story about literally his life, like as a rich showrunner and a rich black showrunner in LA, his large family, and them dealing with like the trouble and there's a lot of privilege because they live in a very fancy house. And in fact, I think part of the show is shot in his like giant LA mansion. And there's a lot of privilege going around too, because the framing device of the show is that his teenage daughter, is making, a documentary about his life for her college, admissions. And he hires her like a 6-person, high-level crew of video people. Like, it is really funny in a lot of ways. It talks about issues that I think, plenty of black people are dealing with in this country. It does feel a little like Blackish done again. Some of the plot lines are straight up the same. And I have to say, like, as much as I love this guy and his shows and his writing, he stars in the show. And Kenya Barris as an actor and as the centerpiece of this whole thing is a little annoying. Just like whiny. Just like he's whining about kind of the dumbest things at times. And I know he's like trying to comment on his own privilege or the state of society, but I don't know if he fully sells it as much as like Anthony Anderson does in Blackish, where Anthony Anderson is a great actor. Like, we've seen him in The Shield. We've seen him in so many things. it's weird that to me, Anthony Anderson sells Kenya Barris more than Kenya Barris himself. So that I don't know, that's kind of funny. I'm really digging it though. It is surprisingly profane at times. Like Rashida Jones plays his wife, and she gets to play an absolutely unlikable character at first, which is interesting to see. Because normally you think of her as like the likable best friend from Parks and Rec or something. No, she does things in the show like she takes Molly and just like has a straight up trip at times. She is very like mean about her kids and very like privileged, and she says things about like demanding the fastest and most expensive car possible. Like it's a very, I think it's a statement on rich wife characters like this, but it is really strange to see Rashida Jones doing this. So yeah, just throwing that out there. If you like Blackish, if you like Kenya Barris, definitely check out Black AF.
That's Black AF. It's on Netflix right now. What else have you been watching, Devendra?
Two quick things. Cursed Films on Shudder. This is a series. It's a documentary series basically about movies that have kind of a reputation to them, like The Crow, like Twilight Zone the movie, like Poltergeist. And it is, it has some people from Fangoria, it has Phil Nobile Jr. and people involved in these movies, and it just kind of goes into their production and interviews people, kind of dives into what the mystery actually is. I watched the Twilight Zone the movie one first because I guess I'm a masochist, but I really want to know like how does the production designer feel about like that horrific accident that happens on set. And I think it does a great job of, bringing up how these things happened, how these movies were made, the cultural context of a lot of these things, like Poltergeist, and potentially using real skeletons in the pool scene. Because everything, it's actually much easier to get like a donated human skeleton than to build something that looks realistic. There's a lot of things like that. I think it's really interesting if you like these types of movies, and if you're a fan of these movies, I think this is a series worth watching. I've also been just in general exploring Shudder more recently because I've wanted to like follow up with some horror movies.
They also
I
did
really
like a 30-day free trial during the quarantine as well.
Yeah, there is a 30-day free trial going around, so check that out. It is definitely worth watching.
Okay, so that's Cursed Films.
Yep.
Anything else?
Briefly, I just want to talk about Hunters on Amazon Prime. This is a show about Nazi hunters, right? Like a group of Nazi hunters hunting Nazis in the U.S., starring Al Pacino. It's very pulpy and poppy and violent and irreverent. This should work. Everything about this should work. And I know a lot of people who have seen the show are really digging it. I am not. I'm not really feeling it because to me, it's a very pulpy show, but I think it's pulpy to the point of like excess where you don't really care about anything happening to these characters. Like it's just so much. And I won't spoil what happens in the first scene of this show, but I think the first scene, within 5 minutes, exactly what this show is, how it treats human life, and what it will take for laughs. And I'm just not into it. So, hey, more power to you if you're enjoying it. I feel like the concept of like, a rebel group of outlaws who are hunting the Nazis that are in the US. There's so much we could do here. It has the premise for such a great show, but I do feel like the writing and the world building just feels it is straight up Austin Powers at time. Like it just feels too silly for us to take it seriously as like a campy violent show. So I'm not feeling it. It's a shame because Al Pacino on TV, how insane is that? Oh well.
Sorry you're not enjoying it, but that is Hunters. It's available right now on Prime Video. Let's move on. Jeff Kanata, what have you been watching this week?
The wife and I finally finished up Ozark Season 3. Ozark, a show that we have very much enjoyed over the years, and one I know has been a big point of contention with you guys because you are not fans.
Well, Devendra, how many episodes have you watched?
I've watched like the first half of the first season and tapped out.
I've watched every episode, including the most recent season.
Yes, but you don't like them.
That's correct.
But
Jeff, go ahead.
I don't even know how to handle that.
Go ahead, Jeff. I have some comments, but you go first.
I mean, I know this is going to be a fight, but I love it. My wife and I love it. We immediately finished the season and got online and we're looking at fan theory. My wife is convinced of something that if we want to talk spoilers, we could talk about, but it is a big thing about a big character in the season, and I find it very fun. It is pulpy, it is over the top, but it is wonderful. I find very juicy, fun television that spins a great yarn and has us hooked. I find the performance, I mean, especially this season, Laura Linney just goes through the ringer, and some of the other actors on the show just it is really it doesn't pull its punches. Yes, some of the things happen strain credulity, but it's pulpy and fun, and I love the yarn. I love the tale being told. It's real good.
I'm really glad you enjoyed it, Jeff. Devindra, you're probably never going to go back to this, right? I'm not going
to. There's just too much.
Yeah, I'm not going to spoil. I'm not going to spoil anything major or anything like that. But there is one thing I do have to talk about.
Go for it.
But okay, Ozark season 3. Here's the reason I keep coming back, Jeff, is because at its heights, the show is actually really good. I think that there are moments of the show that are like transcendently good. Laura Linney, this is some of her best work I've ever seen her do, and
I mean it's Emmy level stuff this season.
I agree. Yeah. She's so good, and that's the reason I keep coming back. Honestly, it's mostly for her, secondarily for Jason Bateman. We got to see a lot more of Janet McTeer this season too, who's an amazing actress.
So good, dude. Oh,
so that's good. You ask like, why do I keep watching? Those are my reasons right there. Jason Bateman, Laura Linney, Janet McTeer,
and also because you said it's really good.
Also, Julia Garner is consistently great as well, so like have to give her a shout out as well. But this season is bad, and I think that I haven't said much about it because I've tried to, in general, I'm trying to turn over a new leaf, guys. I'm trying to like not say as much when I think things are like outright terrible. I know that like,
your new leaf is I'm just waiting until Jeff watches it, and then.
But also it's a lot different. I do think it's a lot different to tweet something like really hateful about a show than it is to talk about it 1 hour into a podcast episode, simply because a lot more people will not be viewing that or consuming that thing that you said an hour into a podcast episode, because they've already tuned out already.
How dare you?
But also,
this is the best. We just got to the good part.
That's right. I mean, you and I know that, Jeff. I'm just saying a lot of people aren't on the uptake on that quite yet. And also like there's just a lot of nuance. Like these a season of television like this is the collective result of like thousands of person hours of work. And if I'm gonna criticize that, I want to at least have more than a tweet to do that, or write something, or even writing something. I didn't even want to write something. Because here's the thing, I was pretty angry at this season, Jeff. I was pretty angry because I thought it was pretty bad, and I think the number one thing that sums up why this season is bad is the character of Ben. This show has been criticized or ridiculed or compared unfavorably to Breaking Bad, and nowhere did this comparison become more unfavorable than this season with Ozark season 3 and the character of Ben in this show compared to the character of Lalo in Better Call Saul, which is, to my money, like one of the best characters in one of the best TV shows on that's airing right now. You know who I'm talking about, right, Jeff? Character of Ben? Did I remember his name?
It is Wendy's brother.
Wendy's brother
becomes a major part of season 3.
A character who I don't think was ever spoken about, or was rarely spoken about. He was mentioned in previous episodes, but comes into the show from out of nowhere, and I knew in the first 15 seconds this character, I'm gonna fucking hate this character, because he exists to only generate drama and to contribute absolutely nothing to the plot. He has no chemistry with Julia Garner's character, in my opinion, and he is completely useless. Like he contributes nothing except making things harder for everyone. There is nothing to root for there, and it's just it is the most nakedly obvious like attempt at creating like a plot generation machine that I've seen in a show in recent memory. So
well, I mean, I think you actually are not completely off base, but I think you fail to acknowledge the fact that his function is to be the truth teller. His function is to walk into this situation and say, does everybody realize what's happening right now? And that to say he is not does not have any redeeming qualities, I think, is to ignore the fact that that's the entire function of that character, is to force that entire family to look at itself because it was going down a road in a very specific way, and force them to reckon with their deeds. And by the end, this question of like, who's the crazy one, I found to be very powerful. I found it to be very compelling. That is the central question with Ben by the end of the season is, who's the crazy one here, me or you? And him screaming at the top of his lungs, this is all nuts. You're all liars. Like literally there's scenes where he's screaming, you are all liars. And that's one of the things I like about this subgenre, right? Is that Sopranos, Breaking Bad, all of these shows, Americans, where you are seduced into rooting for the worst outcomes, right? Rooting for people who, by all accounts, should be prosecuted to the utmost of the law for the horrible things that they do. You are on their side. You're in their pocket. You're watching them and rooting for them to get away with it, right? That's the fun. I like moments in these kinds of shows where the characters that I would most associate myself with, because their worldview, their moral compass is more attuned to mine, because they're like, this is awful. We find ourselves going, no, get rid of them. Figure out a way to silence them. Figure out a way to make sure that they don't mess up this cool scheme that we've got going. That's the whole function of Ben. And I get you saying that he's sort of shoehorned into the dynamic that is established over the first two seasons, but that's kind of the point. He's like this crazy outside, grenade that's tossed into something that was already kind of off kilter and going, but being held together by everyone's desire to make things work. And the grenade goes off and forces everyone to deal with it.
A couple thoughts. Well defended, Jeff. I think that's completely valid, and it's cool that you like him. I would submit to you two things. Number one, I would argue that the best shows on TV don't need to have that character. That they they're so good that they force you to interrogate your own feelings on it without literally putting in a character screaming the themes of the show at the audience and at the other characters. That's all that character was. And the second point I would bring up is just there are ways to have that character, or a character like that, like a character that comes in to gum up the works, and make that character inherently interesting or compelling. And again, the character of Lalo, this is a character in Better Call Saul, came out of nowhere. Like, just like, I didn't even know this was a guy. Yeah. And came out of nowhere.
So good.
And he's like, wow, that guy is interesting. It's like that guy's a complete freaking sociopath, and yet he is extremely likable. And it's like,
he always loved the friendly psychopath too, but he does it so well,
and
like in a
just
Joker.
Like, oh my gosh, like I want to hang out with this guy, but also he just murdered a bunch of people, and it's like that's an amazing accomplishment for the show to do. And this show, Ozark, just did not accomplish that at all with this major character in season 3 for me. So
I can understand him landing poorly on you. I don't think the character for me is a home run, but I kind of felt like as an agitator, that's the intended response. He's not supposed to sit well with you. And I don't know. I guess I give the show a little more credit than you do. I think it's easy to say, yeah, he was screaming the themes of the show at the top of his lungs and painting that as some sort of weakness in the show. But for me, in the context of those moments, it really was effective. It wasn't. Perhaps it wasn't as nuanced as it could have been, but I felt like those moments really were impactful. And I don't know. I don't think necessarily just using a blunt instrument is bad on the face of it. Like, it's how it's done, and I thought it was done effectively. I mean, I was invested in the outcome of that character. I thought the relationships he garnered through the course of the season.
Garnered, huh?
I thought the
That's something you would point out, Jeff. If I said it, you would have pointed it out.
You're right. You're right. I think that I don't know. It worked much more for me than for you. And I thought the last 2 episodes especially were really emotionally hard to watch. It was like the show went there and did some intense things. I thought the season was great.
All right. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. I don't want to spend more time arguing about it, but I'm glad you allowed me to air some of my discontent with the series, and I appreciate you being a good sport about it. Just want to clarify one thing in the chat room. Hamstrung is saying you're not supposed to want to hang out with him, and you said that too. I just want to be clear. I wouldn't actually want to hang out with Lalo from Better Call Saul because he's freaking terrifying.
I think he's a good cook. I think it'd be kind of fun for a while before things get too crazy.
I'm not saying it's a prerequisite that you need to want to have a beer with any character that is going to be good. Okay, just putting that out there.
That's for presidents only.
Yeah, that's for presidents only. That's right. Okay, Jeff Kanata. What else are you watching?
I also we talked a little bit about this last episode, but Middleditch and Schwartz is on Netflix. 3 specials that are completely improvised, 2-man improv, which is my favorite kind of improv. Two-person improv, long form. I have performed improv a lot in my life and love it. But as we acknowledged last week, very difficult to translate onto film, onto a time-shifted experience, because it is such a live experience, knowing that things are being made up in the moment. It really is difficult to film it and make it feel as urgent, as immediate, as in the moment as it is when you watch it live. And they have really accomplished that with the show. I give a lot of credit to how the show is shot. As you mentioned last week, Dave, a lot of cameras were used, which is, I think, very smart.
Well, and because typically something like this would be shot with like 1 or 2 cameras, like a wide and a tight, and that's it, right? But they really tried to make it cinematic.
I think even more than cinematic, present. Like you're with them, you're on stage with them a lot.
Yeah.
It is a lot of it's very well edited, and kudos to them for not trying to edit it into something slicker and leaving in a lot of the stuff that happens in improv where things don't really sync up, or there are moments where they can't remember the names of characters that they've established, and so they ask each other all of that stuff is in it, and it really does feel like, oh, I'm watching the hour that they spent in front of this audience as it was. It's not trying to be overly sculpted into something new. And it's really funny. These guys are great. They're very, very good. And I like I said, I don't think they're Adsit and Pasquazi good, but that's my sort of improv idols. But they are very good, very funny, very fun, craft long form stories that hold together. In the first episode, which is called Parking Lot Wedding, there is a setup that the 2 of them don't know is a setup at the time, and it pays off in the most beautiful way. And you just watch it happen where Ben Schwartz just brings something back that they didn't know they were setting up, and it completely pulls the entire story together. It's amazing. And it turned this weird non sequitur moment of one guy going, "Oh, I'm a ghost," into something that was like, oh my God, it all makes sense now. and those kind of things, that's the magic of long form improv, is when it all feels like it was written because something that happened, 15 minutes into the show comes back an hour into the show and seems like it was all the perfect setup and payoff. So these guys, that takes a lot of skill, a lot of focus, remembering and being clear and listening. It's really fun and funny, and I think a great improv. What's the word? A great welcome into the world of improv for anybody that may be curious about how it works.
Yeah, agreed with a lot of what you said there. That's Middleditch and Schwartz, and it's streaming right now on Netflix. Jeff Kanata, anything else you've been watching?
Well, real quick, I just want to mention the fact that the National Theater, I think I brought this up before, but the National Theater, I think it's because of the quarantine, has decided to take their National Theater Live, which was this initiative that I think I mentioned several times now, of playing theater, playing the National Theater, the videoed productions in movie theaters on specific dates and times. So it's like a one-time only. Got to show up at the movie theater, and it's almost like watching a live production because I mean, in some cases they were actually beaming the live feed from the room. Really a cool idea to sort of open up these incredible productions to a larger audience. Now, because of quarantine, they have done it on YouTube. And again, they are limited time. I think they're a week or 2 weeks a piece that these plays, and some of them rather old. Like they're not, they have the two governors from James, what is his name? Late night guy, James
Corden?
Corden, yes, excuse me. That's kind of what put him on the map and got him his late night show. So how long he's been doing that? That was the play he did before that, won him an Emmy, or not an Emmy, a Tony and all that stuff. Anyway, I enjoy theater. I've done a lot of it. I love Shakespeare. I love theater. There's an incredible Twelfth Night that I watched. And they just put up Benedict Cumberbatch's Frankenstein, which is quite good too. And I mean, these are filmed versions of plays. It's much more what we were talking about Middleditch and Schwartz not doing, right? These are very well filmed, but they're very much presenting a proscenium to you, not really putting the number of cameras on the stage. And I understand why, right? These are running productions that you wouldn't want to just throw a cameraman on stage amidst the actors. But still very watchable. I mean, some of the stuff is very big, like it's made for a multiple 1,000-seat theater, I think. Very large theaters that they usually perform these in. So a lot of the performances are to the back row when a camera is much closer than that. So some of them don't. It maybe can feel a little big for the tiny YouTube screen, but still very much interesting, very, very worthwhile to watch. I highly recommend watching the National Theater. You can follow them on Twitter. You can subscribe to their YouTube page, and then I think every week they're doing, or every couple of weeks they're doing new plays.
Yeah, I actually I kind of debated with you guys whether we should do like a review of Danny Boyle's Frankenstein for the Slash Filmcast. Let us know if that's something you'd be interested in. But otherwise, we do have a plan for next week. We're going to share it with you at the end of the episode. So before you write in, know that it's competing with whatever that movie we're going to say is. Okay. So that's what we've been watching. And yeah, check out the National Theater on YouTube. And they're posting, I think it's called National Theater at Home is the program where you get to see the programs at home for a limited time. That's what we've been watching this week. Let's move on. Before we get to our review of Bad Education, we got to thank people who donated to the show. And I think this list is pretty current, although there's a couple people on here that might have written in and said, hey, you might have forgotten to mention me. So a big thanks to Ethan Lutsky for subscribing at the rate of $2 per month. And also a big thanks to the following people: Michael Elhard, Brendan Day, Christopher Mele, Elliot Yately from the United Kingdom, Majed Juma, Lisa M. Cook, Tyler O'Hara from Jackson, Mississippi, Josh and David Brown, Key Chung, Sarah Norris, William Harris, and Isaac Clisby, who writes, quote, "You guys have been a part of my life for 1 marriage, 2 cross-country round-trip road trips, 3 jobs, something very clever with a 4 in it, and 5 years. And I've never gotten around to do anything about it. So here you go. My wife and I listen to the podcast all the time when we're on long road trips, or even just sitting around the house with nothing to do. And we got to say, keep it up, Jeff. From Hustlers to Aladdin to The Cat in the Hat knows that. Jeff is never afraid to express opinions that aren't necessarily popular or even welcome. And we super appreciate that. We tend to find ourselves siding with Jeff on almost every movie we've ever seen, to the point that the ones you guys cover that we have to watch are the ones that Dave and Devindra don't like, but have Jeff saying, come on, guys, you can't tell me ...
Hey, that's like Ozark this week.
From one set of quarantine parents to another, we hope he's doing well. I like how they say, we hope he's doing well. Fuck those other guys on the show.
We also said, great job, Jeff, for saying the dumb shit no one else will say. I like that.
You feel validated. Yeah.
Because it's one thing for people to be like, hey, Nice job on your opinions, Jeff. Hope everyone is doing well. But it's like, great job on the opinions, Jeff. Hope Jeff is doing well.
I think the implication is I need the most help in that regard. I think the implication is you guys are fine. Boy, I hope Jeff's okay.
Also, a shout out to Brian P. Hayes as well as Gretchen L. from San Juan Bautista, California. Those are some donations that might have come in a while ago that I did not recognize on a previous episode. Thanks to everyone for donating. And if, again, you donated and I missed you, email /filmcast@gmail.com. I'll make it right. But paypal.me/filmcast is a place where you want to do that. That's paypal.me/filmcast. You can also go to the /film page, /film.com. Click on the PayPal, the /filmcast tab, and click on the PayPal links on the side of the page to make a regular donation. It's a challenging time for everyone. Please do not donate if it in any way causes you any hardship whatsoever. There's a really easy way you can support us for free. That's just going to the Apple Podcast page, leaving us a review or a star rating. It just takes a few seconds. Let's get to our review of Bad Education. What do we think is a spoiler in this movie?
I think the description that was on HBO is a spoiler.
I mean, it was a big story for.
I didn't know it.
Well, maybe we should just say that.
I couldn't believe when I read the description after seeing the movie. I'm kind of going to talk about this, but
I think the IMDb one.
Couldn't believe it.
Yeah. Okay. Let's just say we're probably going to reveal plot details from the real thing then. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Personally, I think that. I mean, we can say that. That's fine. I personally think that him being involved at all is a spoiler because I didn't know he was.
I agree.
For the whole movie, it does this awesome tease with.
Yeah. I agree. I'm right there with you, Jeff. I'm right there with you. And okay. All right. We'll get into it. Okay. That was from the trailer for Bad Education, the newest film by Corey Finley. It's available right now on HBO. Now, before we dive into this movie, it is based on a true story. And I think in order to talk about it, we're probably going to need to spoil it from the outset, or at least reveal some plot details from the outset. So,
but I'm very glad I didn't know anything about the true story before watching it. I really am.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that that's my MO, but in this case in particular,
Jeff, same. I did the same thing. So go ahead.
Yeah, I had no idea. Anything about the story or the details of the true story. I mean, it happened way back in 2002, the other side of the country from where I live, so I completely missed it. And I didn't read any kind of summary before watching it. So I'm very pleased. So if you're listening to this and you're curious about it, I would say watch it without knowing anything. I think it'll make a much more fun experience, personally.
Yeah.
I mean, don't even read. For me, after I saw it, I read the little HBO blurb when you click on the streaming app, and the blurb like gives away stuff that I'm glad I didn't know.
Yeah. Well, anyway, guys, this week I had a chance to watch this movie where Hugh Jackman plays a person who is in a position of power and importance when he invites a journalist to investigate him, only to have that request completely blow up in his face and lead to his undoing. But enough about The Front Runner, directed by Jason Reitman, guys.
Wow.
Whoa.
That's a
deep cut there. Deep Jason Reitman cut there. For those
I was wondering how this was going to relate to Logan.
Boom goes with dynamite. I mean, it is fascinating that in both that movie and this movie, Hugh Jackman plays a guy who taunts a journalist. Investigate me, why don't you? And then it goes.
I don't think he taunts her in this one, but yeah, it's a weird thing.
You're okay. No, you're right. It's not really a taunt in the other one either. But anyway, point being, a lot of similarities.
Hoisted by his own petard, as you like to say.
Yes. I think that's a Jeff quote. But anyway, here's the plot summary from IMDb. The beloved superintendent of New York's Roslyn School District and his staff, friends, and relatives become the prime suspects in the unfolding of the single largest public school embezzlement scandal in American history. Devendra Hardawar, let's start with you. I mean, I think you were a fan of Corey Finley's last movie, Thoroughbreds, which I thought was actually pretty great, in my opinion.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. When I talked about it on the show, I just didn't have I didn't know really what to make of it. I appreciate it. It's not a movie I loved, but it's definitely something that's stuck with me, right? Because Thoroughbreds is a movie about rich girls in Connecticut and kind of a lot of issues that they're dealing with, and there's a specificity to that I really appreciated as somebody who, I grew up in Connecticut, not in the rich neighborhoods, but I knew those types of people. And I feel a lot of that here because I believe Corey Finley also grew up in Roslyn and he kind of lived through this whole thing. So I love this movie. I think this movie is thrilling in the way that, like, an Ocean's movie can be at its best. And I also love that it's so like grounded in the reality of this town. Like everybody looks like normal people, like even Hugh Jackman, like he looks like a flashy actor, but in the way that kind of separates him from everybody else. And people even kind of make fun of him for it. So I love the specificity of this movie. And I just love the idea of like these administrators kind of getting involved in something, this investment going way, way wild, and just seeing like the degree to which they have justified it for themselves and how far it's gone for both of them. Hugh Jackman, amazing. Like this is one of his best roles ever, but I also really loved Allison Janney in this movie. And there's just so much. I love the girl who actually plays the young reporter who kind of brings this all down. I believe it's who is it? Geraldine Viswanathan. Like there's so much going on in this movie because it's there's so many layers to it. And I feel like this is a movie that's always ready to surprise you, even if you know the basic structure of it. Like I knew this basic story, but to see it all go down and to see like, I don't know, like deeper elements of what their criminality may reveal about themselves, deeper things about Hugh Jackman's life. I found there's just so much to love here, but specifically also the idea that this guy is still like a good educator, which is fascinating to me. It's not like he's just American Psycho. I'm going to take all the money from the school system and, become as rich and powerful as I can. Like there are so many scenes in this movie. And in fact, the inciting scene where he convinces Rachel to, don't treat this like school newspaper piece like a puff piece. Make it something real. It's only as big as you make it. And that reminds me of like the great advice I used to get from educators back in the day. He seems like he's deeply empathetic, but what's also interesting is that he can use that superpower and use it to twist and manipulate people to his own ends too. So yeah, so much going on here. I absolutely love this movie.
Jeff Kanata.
I agree about Geraldine Viswanathan. She was great in Blockers. Yeah. And I can't wait until she has a large enough oeuvre that we can just marathon her movies so you can have a Viswanathan-a-thon.
Just really had to go there.
Yep.
Yeah,
okay.
I've heard good things, by the way. She's in Miracle Workers, and Miracle Workers, people have said great things about her.
Jeff, here's my question: is how long were you saving that up for? Was it just
really saving that?
Was it just like since you watched the movie, or did you just extemporize it just now?
Yeah, it was just it was off the cuff.
Whoa. Okay. Anyway. This is a movie where afterwards I kind of read the article it was based on and read a bunch of like what was the true story. I will talk about that later. Let's talk about the movie first, right?
Yeah.
But I do want to just call out that we will get to like the truth versus fiction part of this. Jeff Kanata, your thoughts on Bad Education?
Well, Dave, I guess you could say my thoughts about Bad Education are best summed up in the form of a limerick. Incredibly watchable scenes about crimes that were clearly obscene. But this film has me asking, teachers multitasking? Do the ends justify the means?
That one's a little bit of a thinker, Jeff.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes I got to mix it up,
Yeah.
They just can't be all Viswanathan-a-thons, you know what I'm saying? So I agree with almost every single thing that Devindra said. Obviously, 2020 is a weird year for movies. There's fewer of them, but this right now is my favorite movie of the year. I absolutely loved it. I am so pleased, as I said in our little intro buildup, I'm so pleased that I didn't know where this was going because I loved how this movie lays the breadcrumbs. It unfolds in such an interesting way. I really didn't know who was implicated and where it was going. It really felt like this, almost like a mystery unraveling. And I love how Devendra referenced an Ocean's movie. It does feel like that, like where, you see how the plot, it pulls you forward like those movies where it's like, oh, how's this all going to happen? Who's involved and what's the details? And man, I really loved it. The performances are all great. It is, it's so juicy and interesting, but central to that, again, as Devendra mentioned, I also love this idea. And I don't know the details, how generous they are being with Frank as a depiction of a real life person.
Yeah.
But from the movie's depiction, if we just take the movie at face value and not think about it as a true story, the movie's depiction is what Devendra pointed out, which is this guy is doing good. He is legitimately doing good. He cares. He really invests in the students in a real emotional way. They all seem to get something out of him. The schools are improving in tangible ways. If you take this idea that, if you take it on face value that he is actually good at his job and doing good for the community and making lots of lives better, it's exactly what my limerick said, which is I found myself at the end really pondering this notion of, hey, teachers are underpaid. Like obviously
teachers are, superintendents not as much.
Well, sure,
throwing that out there.
Obviously on the face of it, this is gross malfeasance.
Yeah,
and I'm not condoning anything that was done, but at the same time, like, this is money spent by the school district to improve the school district, and it improved the school district. Like, there's a point at which, like, man, you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater here in a little bit. Not that I think people should get away with this, not that it's, but I love the moral dilemma that the movie posed in my brain, because it's an interesting idea. It's like how far down the rabbit hole, and the way the movie presents the genesis of this problem, where I was like, hey, it was just this, this bagel that I bought, and then there was a cup of coffee, and then it just kept going, and nobody noticed it. I really loved that. I loved how it made me think, as well as entertaining me. It's funny very funny at times, beautifully shot, very stylized in some, it's willing to go into a very almost cartoonish. There are these shots where the whole school board they're all like cartoon characters, it's really fun. It reminded me a lot of the movie Election.
Yes, that was the movie that came to mind, particularly in the opening scenes as well. I think.
Yeah, he's preparing to speak. Yeah.
Because in both movies, both Election and this movie deal with the idea of educators who are really dissatisfied with their place in life, right?
Right.
Like they've achieved what they feel like they could achieve. And like their job is seeing other people go on to achieve things greater than they have achieved.
Right.
And like the kind of simmering discontentment that can result from that, and then how that causes people to act out. In the case of Election, it was rigging an election. In the case of this movie, it is stealing millions of dollars from taxpayers.
But by the way, shout out to the Next Picture Show, because I believe they did compare these two movies directly. So that's a fun conversation to listen to.
Great podcast. I really love this movie as well. I don't know if it's my favorite one. I mean, Sonic the Hedgehog is in the mix, so
you gotta have room for Sonic.
Yeah,
come on,
gotta have room for Sonic. But yeah, this is definitely one of my favorite movies I've seen this year. I think it touches upon all these really interesting ideas. One is this idea that we should be paying educators more, right? They should be people who are paid as well as like investment bankers and things of that nature, and
especially educators in like a rich town like Roswell.
Yeah, and it's.
I mean, it makes the point that he's literally making money for everyone in town. He's literally improving,
property values.
Right,
exactly. Yeah,
like, the movie points those things out, and it's like, well, you're making a good point here.
Yeah. Again, do not condone the financial malfeasance in any
Of
way.
course.
keep this going.
And
Even
this
though
guy,
like, a
this
lot
guy,
of the money he's taking is like the tax dollars from these rich families who live here too. So yeah.
I
don't know.
do think he was. I've never met the guy, but he does seem like he has sociopathic tendencies in his ability to like lie and manipulate. So like,
Just a bit.
and Hugh Jackman's performance is really great. I think in this movie, like,
Yeah.
who like putting aside whether he resembles the actual real life person, the idea of this guy who has like all this resentment building up, who lives a triple life basically, and has to maintain all of that. It just, you see this guy kind of being torn up in slow motion during the course of the movie, and I think that's just really great work from him. So one aspect is like how much do we pay teachers? By the way, the real life, this guy Frank Toussaint, I think is his name, right? Was paid around $200,000 per year, which
Evidently, still is being paid 172 grand a year in pension money.
I love it.
I mean, guys, I'm just gonna put this out there. I think that's like you can live a pretty good life with $200,000 a year.
Pretty good.
I'll take
Yeah.
it. I'll take it. If anybody wants to donate to our PayPal.
My point, I guess my point being that like I think that does help to put his actions into context a little bit, because if he was making $18,000 or $25,000 a year, it's like, oh, okay, like that makes it more understandable. But he's making 200
Right.
grand a year, and
he's
like,
already doing pretty well.
he's already doing like really well, like
Yeah.
a life that like would be the envy of many people.
That's a very good point.
Right, you
Yeah,
know what I mean. And so
very
it's
good point.
like
he
but
wasn't
it's-
he wasn't in squalor to start with. Yeah,
Correct.
he wasn't being underpaid.
So it's like, but that wasn't enough. That wasn't enough, and it's like this fundamental notion of greed. And this is a very common story of people who are like surrounded by very rich people and who like end up feeling like they are them, and then
Right.
it kind of
A
leads
very
to
like
their
talented Mr. Ripley thing going on.
right,
here. Yeah.
exactly. Telling Mr. Ripley, yeah, they think they are them, and then ends up leading to their downfall in some way. So our education system, I like that the education system is just kind of in the background always. The idea of how much we will do as a society, or how much parents will do to make sure their kids get into good colleges. And like it is
Yeah.
so cutthroat out there right now, and
Tones of that scandal that we saw just last year with all
yes.
those famous,
Right.
people trying to
What are
buy their
people
way.
willing to do? What are people willing to cover up to preserve chances for their children? And I love that line at the end when he says to Ray Romano, like, "I can still get your daughter into Harvard," right? And like
Yeah.
you can
By
imagine.
the way,
Yep. go.
Romano is great in this movie.
Yes.
He's great at everything.
He's
we
turned into
yeah.
such a good actor,
So
man.
good.
Wow.
Yeah, he's great. He's great. So that's one component of it, and then also, by the way, love the fact that American Vandal, the guy who played the guy who
Oh,
drew
I
the
know.
dicks in American Vandals in this movie.
So good.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Um,
And Carrie Ryan from The Shield. We got lots of Shield going on in this episode. Carrie Ryan from The Shield makes a small part in this movie too.
yeah. Wait, Carrie Ryan?
Yeah, the Sean Ryan's wife, isn't she in this? I think she's one of the school board members.
Oh, huh. Oh, yeah. Okay.
I just recognize her, so I haven't double checked that, but it certainly looked a lot like her.
Well, let's double check that, because that's not the first
Yeah.
time you've thought really strongly that you thought someone was in this thing.
But
We can have a
Dave,
super
we literally got a donation from people saying Jeff says dumb stuff that is unwise. So I'm just doubling down. Doubling down.
Yeah. Now I need to check. And I don't really see her, but
I don't see her either.
yeah.
I'm looking.
So I don't think that's
keep all this in.
sure looked like her though.
I don't think that's
Whoa.
correct at all, Jeff.
All right.
Anyway.
Carrie Ryan's doppelgangers in this movie.
Moving on, yeah. So I think this idea of like how much we pay teachers and how we deal with corporate financial malfeasance, whether we cover it up as a society, and like what motivates that, but also the importance of journalism, right? And how without journalism, this never would have been uncovered. And the media industry is just getting decimated right now by the current coronavirus pandemic. And stories like this, I feel, really help to demonstrate why it's important to have journalists.
Yeah. And also this debuted in a high school newspaper. Like I wish we had more time with Rachel as a character and her dad too, because I feel like there's a lot going on there. Because he's like what, a disgraced investment banker or something. Like
Yeah.
he was tangentially involved in something bad, but didn't actually do anything bad. But he's still kind of disgraced, and yeah, people talk about him behind his back, I guess. But she as a character is so brave. All the decisions she makes, like she has the thing where she wonders if she shouldn't do this, and even her editor does the thing you also see sometimes in journalism of people just being complete cowards and kind of kowtowing the line of power.
Well,
And
to
she
be fair,
decides
he's
to
like
go
a high
against that.
school sophomore or whatever, in this movie
Sure,
at least.
sure, he's a high school sophomore, but he's somebody who wants to go on and do journalism for, like, he wants to go be a journalist. So yeah, I'm sure he's a high school sophomore, but so she was even younger, right? Like a lower level reporter. And I just think like that sort of like grit and tenacity I really love in newspaper movies. Like, to me, this is a great newspaper movie along the lines of like Spotlight or something.
Yeah.
Like it is up there.
Spotlight Teen Edition.
Yeah.
Although
Also,
it is interesting to note that is the biggest part of the movie that is completely fabricated. That
Yeah.
is
her whole
yeah,
character,
absolute fiction.
Yeah.
Well,
But-
we'll get into that, but shout out to Alex Wolff, who plays the newspaper editor, who by the way is a senior in the. I was being facetious a little bit, but yeah, he's a senior because he says at the end like Hugh Jackman's character is writing his recommendation letter. So, but
Yes,
he is
yes.
also the main lead in Hereditary and still playing. I think he passes himself off as a high schooler pretty convincingly in this movie. So.
Mhm.
But yeah, like the role of journalism in uncovering this kind of stuff is really important. And if the entire journalism industry were to collapse, or if significant parts of it were to, then like stuff like this just would never be uncovered, and that would be to the detriment of us all.
And I like how the movie depicts her journey through this
Mhm.
as sort of honest and not like. None of the people that try to dissuade her, most notably Allison Janney, mistreat her, or
Yeah.
there's no villainy that she immediately recognizes. She's just curious and kind of wants to do a good job, and everybody's like, okay, you're doing great, but this don't worry about any of this. And she just keeps at it. I like that it wasn't drawn in such broad terms that it felt like she was on a crusade from the beginning.
Right.
She was just trying to do a good job.
Yeah.
It's kind of the banality of embezzling evil, as it were. Like
Right.
yeah. But so a couple other things about the filmmaking I want to call out before we move on to like the truth versus fiction part of this is I think the school as a location is really well realized in this movie.
Mhm.
The way it's lit, like it looks like it's like lit by all these fluorescents and.
It looks like a prison. It looks like a broken down
Yeah.
prison. Like every time you see inside a classroom, like this is a movie about a lot of these administrators flaunting wealth in so many ways, like with houses by the beach, but the classrooms are disgusting.
Yeah, they're
and
leaky.
gross.
They're leaking, and even as they enrich themselves, like they never fix things up. I mean, really, it's really breathtaking the extent of the theft. Like if they had just stolen, like if it had been only in fact a couple 100,000 or something like
Yeah,
that, I
yeah.
feel like they
Well,
probably
how
could have.
brazen they are,
Yeah,
living
how
these extravagant
brazen,
lifestyles. The
yes.
fact that even in the true story of it, this is not embellished for the film, that Allison Janney's character drove a Porsche that had a personalized license
Yeah.
plate talking about the rich community that she lived in, and she drove it into school every day.
Yeah, I think it was a
Yeah.
Jaguar actually. But
Oh, it was a
yes.
Jaguar? Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And those
but
Concorde flights, yeah.
Concorde flights are true, and
Yeah.
his
Well, the
he's
Concorde flight I kind of get, like, assuming nobody will know about. But when you drive your sports car that has a personalized license plate into work
Yeah.
every day, man.
the plastic surgery, and he apparently spent like $50,000 on like diet supplements or diet assistance.
Yeah.
So yeah, it really is breathtaking to behold. The only other thing I want to call out about the filmmaking is I really enjoyed the score by Michael Abels. It's
Mhm.
kind of very minimalist, but also like ramps up the tension in a way that I thought was really effective. So anyway,
Yeah.
shout out to that. But let's talk about some of the things that didn't happen. Jeff, you've already pointed
Well,
out.
one thing I want to
Oh,
bring up too
yep.
before we get to this point too, like this is a movie too about a guy juggling, his homosexuality and how he didn't feel he hit it. He hit it for 30 years apparently, like some extreme amount of time.
Yeah.
And
He
I just
claims
find
that's
that
not true. He
yeah,
claims
yeah,
none
yeah.
of that's true from the film, but
Sure. But it just in the movie, yeah, it is. To me, it's interesting to see somebody who's not only like come up with so much contempt for the society around him, but maybe as a character, somebody who felt like he could never be himself. Like there is so much like latent rage here in terms of how he's taking it back, or how he's striking against society where he could never feel fully comfortable. I found that really interesting as well. And there are several reveals in this movie about like his relationship, his actual long-term relationship. There's a scene in like that Upper East Side apartment building, which I think is just one of the best like reaction shots.
It was
So good.
It was amazing.
So long.
That whole
Yeah.
sequence was so good because
Yeah.
the student journalist is there. I'm sure that didn't happen in real life, but the student
Yeah,
journalist is there, and then she sees him, and then they like make eye contact for a second, and then it cuts to him kind of eating at dinner, and you can tell he's still thinking about that
Yeah,
event
yeah.
that just occurred. Like he's putting
Well,
together
she-
the pieces of like everything that had to happen for her to be there in that moment.
Yep.
It's,
But it's like a
so
straight
great,
up like
too, that-
Mission Impossible scene too. Like she goes there, she doesn't know what to talk to the guy, but she sees Hugh Jackman come and she runs away. We think, oh, maybe she got out. Nope.
Yeah.
Oh,
It's
man.
so good how she almost gets away and
Yeah.
then doesn't. I love the shot that's the sort of POV shot of her talking to him, and then how it's slowly the zoom, the lens changes to, so we focus in on the background for a second, and then he like leans in and is like, hey, what are you looking at? It's
Yeah.
so great.
Yeah.
It's also
a very
great.
subjective point of view. Yeah, very very good. But I think overall we love the movie, and also as a piece of historical fiction, I think that we've reviewed a lot of things based off of true stories,
Right.
The Irishman and The Social Network and things like that. And this is one where I felt like it takes these facts and makes it into a really compelling narrative. And I felt like, having read the actual true story, I feel like it got most of it right. Like there was very little I thought, oh man, that was really unfair that they did that.
Well, I mean,
Um,
the whole thing that you based your Boom Goes the Dynamite on is not true. But
Correct,
I
correct.
think it's a very effective Hollywoodization of the story, where you are the reason for your own demise. That hubris of
Yes.
encouraging her to dig deeper and not just do a puff piece. Evidently, none of that happened.
Yeah.
They found, it's like somebody slipped them a note that
Well, yeah, that was
Yeah.
interesting because the whole basis of it was that an anonymous note was received
Mhm.
that accused. So this is what actually happened. It was they received an anonymous note accusing the guy, the Hugh Jackman character, of embezzlement, and it was an anonymous note. No one knows where from. And the movie didn't include that at all, which I thought was
Right.
pretty surprising. My guess is because they didn't know who it came from, and so
Yeah.
because they
Yeah.
didn't know who it came from, they didn't want to leave that thread open, and so they just didn't deal with it at all. And
Well, and
Uh,
the thrust of what's important is that the student journalists are the reason that any of
Yes.
this came out in the first place. Yes, it was covered by all these big newspapers, but the first newspaper to break the story was the student paper. And so if you're writing a screenplay about that, you want to amalgamate all the students that did it into one
Mhm.
courageous character
yeah,
that
into one
follows
student.
her nose.
Yeah, into one. Even though this was like, this is a thing that like the movie builds up to this one big moment of the student publishes it, and oh my gosh, it's shocking, and at work everyone gives him the disapproving look. In reality, this obviously took place over many months, and it was many newspapers that were involved in it. The student newspaper was just the first one that tipped them off, but like Newsday really got in on it, and quote unquote every newspaper in the tri-state area got in on it.
And also, evidently, it took 2 years of him still working at his job, Frank, between when the Allison Janney
Yeah.
character gets arrested and he goes down. So the movie compresses a lot of time as well. But you're right. I think the major beats feel authentic to what
the
seems to have
emotional
happened.
truth, right? I
Yeah.
think it comes through from reading the reality of it. This is also a case of, we talk a lot about whitewashing, where characters that used to be person of color in a specific work then become a white person in an updated work happens quite a bit, really, really frequently enough that there is a term for it. And this is an instance of brown washing that I guess, because the real life character is a woman named Rebecca Rombaum, and I believe she is white. And I thought, anyway, it's just it's a case of brown washing, where like, and she's an amalgamation of separate characters too.
Yeah, I think that's the more salient point, is that it's not taking a character that was white and turning her brown. It is taking a whole group of people that did a thing and turning it into one character that's new.
Yeah, no, fair enough. But I thought that was a nice touch that they did.
Yeah,
they did that.
I personally dig it. It's nice to see different people in general take on these roles. Dave, you brought up the scene of him like walking to school and everybody giving him disapproving looks. I have to say that is so perfect. You know, like it's such a quiet thing, and like this is a time the internet existed, but you know, where they weren't as connected at the time. But the way the students look at him, and then the way the staff look at him, it is such a perfect like going to a fancy dinner party and saying something, you know, really off color or something, where you just like you broke the decorum of this society. You are now an outcast, and it's so perfect.
It's a great shot too, because you're on. It's like you're facing him.
Yeah.
And then you're only seeing the disapproving looks from behind him out of focus. And then slowly it becomes more and more in focus, and slowly it's revealed like the true immensity of the reaction. And it was a great moment in the movie. So
I really liked the fact that so much of what Frank says you kind of can agree with. Like there's that sequence with the the annoying mom and her kid who's always coming into the office, where he loses it. And in most movies, that's the moment where he turns into a monster.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
But he's still trying to help the kid.
Yeah.
Like he's lost it. He's broken. He's cracked in some way.
He's louder, but yeah.
Yes, but he's still trying to get the kid to understand what acceleration means. Like he's still being an educator, and he's still being kind of respectful. And when she leaves and says, "You should be ashamed of yourself," I went, "No." He was doing it really. He's still like obviously a monster, obviously a terrible person, but like in that moment, he was still a pretty decent guy.
Yeah,
I kind of dig that.
Yeah. So that raises one final point we can discuss, I think, which is that I remember when we reviewed American Vandal with Alan Scherstl on this podcast. American Vandal was a film based on a true story of these guys who robbed a library. And one of the motivations they had for robbing it was like, they're like, our lives are not interesting enough, you know? We need to do something interesting and cool. So let's rob a library, you know? And Alan made a point. He's like, on the one hand, you know, these guys are villains in the movie, and they're clearly depicted to be assholes. But on the other hand, you know, when the real life people that these characters are based off of like go on a third date, this movie's going straight into the DVD player. Something along those lines, right? And I think the only downside of this movie is that it really makes this character out to be extremely sympathetic. He's played by Hugh Jackman, who's very charismatic.
Yep.
And he gives that speech at the end where he rails about how we treat educators so poorly, and you agree with him. You're like, yeah, you know what? We should treat educators better. And I do understand why you stole $4 million, you know?
Right.
And
I think even more than that, the very last moment of the movie is a pseudo dream sequence that seems to have the movie come down very firmly on the side that all his greatest dream was for them to be number one.
Right.
Like that's all he wanted.
That's all he wanted. All this guy wanted was to be number one, right? Why do you want to stop that from happening?
Yeah.
He also wants
it's
to be
for the children. This is for what he did is for the children as much as what Walter White did in Breaking Bad was for his family.
Yes, he's a complete Walter White. Like the way he self-justifies, it's perfect.
Yeah, so that's the one part of the movie that kind of troubled me a little bit. Is like, you know, I don't know that I think it might paint too sympathetic of a portrait of this guy, based on what we know. So anyway, stuff to think about, stuff to reflect on. That's our review of Bad Education. We had a great time with it. Check it out on HBO if you listened this far and haven't seen it for some reason. Find more episodes of this podcast at /filmcast.com. Email us at /filmcast@gmail.com. Our spoiler bumper comes from filmmaker Kyle Hillinger, although we didn't use it today. Our theme song comes from AdamWarrock.com. This episode was edited by the great Beatty Zhang. Stay tuned to hear what movie we'll be discussing next week. In the meantime, Devindra, where can we find more of your work on the internet?
Oh, you can find me on @Devindra. You can find me on Twitter at @Devindra. I write about tech at Engadget.com. Check me out on the Engadget podcast. We just had a brief interview with Greg Daniels and the cast and crew of Upload. So that was a fun chat. Go take a listen.
How about you, Jeff Kanata?
You can follow me on Twitter. I'm at Jeff Kanata, which is spelled with 2 N's and 1 T. I also do a video game podcast called DLC, which you can find at 5by5.tv/DLC. I have a comedy science show called We Have Concerns. You can find that at wehaveconcerns.com. And I do a long-form Dungeons & Dragons show. It is called The Dungeon Run. You can find that wherever you get podcasts by searching for The Dungeon Run. You can also find it on YouTube because it is a video show as well. We just debuted virtual reality set, which is pretty rad to see. Really, really cool way to do minis and maps. So check that out on YouTube by searching for The Dungeon Run, or watch it live Wednesday nights, 6 p.m. Pacific time at caffeine.tv/The Dungeon Run.
Check out my other podcast, Culturally Relevant. Also, just announced this week that I am hosting a new show brought to you by Audio Boom called Truth versus Hollywood, where we analyze movies that were based off of a true story and talk about what was true and what was not. We have experts, people who were involved in the actual true story on the show to talk about their reflections on it.
Very cool. Seems like Bad Education would be a prime candidate.
Indeed. So the show's Truth vs. Hollywood, it debuts in June, but you can subscribe to it now on your podcast platform of choice. I co-host that with Joanna Robinson. Next week, okay. So I'll give you some insight into how this generally works. There's usually a new release calendar where the three of us gather together and we say, hey, let's review blank next week. And then we argue about it, we discuss, and then we decide, okay, fine, we'll do it. Well, there are many things coming out on video on demand and rental and everything next week, but there was nothing we could all really agree on that was coming out recently that we're like, hey, we should all review that. Because we want to review something that kind of hits this challenging to hit mark, where it's something that we think people are going to want to listen to, and it's something that we're going to want to talk about, and it's something that's going to make for an interesting conversation. So
what should be coming out right now, Dave? Isn't it like Marvel movie week? Wouldn't it normally be the beginning of May? Shouldn't we be watching Black Widow or something?
Would have been Black Widow.
Killing me.
Black Widow was supposed to come out last week. So in an alternate universe, dev style, we are we are watching Black Widow and Mulan and all those other things. So what we have done, Jeff, Devindra, and I, is we've started preparing a list of movies that are on our list of shame that we've never seen that we want to see, and also movies that we just want to review on the podcast from old movies that we want the other guys to watch, right? And so we started preparing that list, and so I called it the /Filmcast Contingency Plan. That is a Google Doc that we started a few weeks ago. In the event that we didn't have anything new to review or that we could all agree on, we would just inflict upon each other movies that we wanted to watch or really wanted the other people to watch. And next week, we are going to be reviewing one of those movies. Jeff Kanata, you want to tell us about this movie that we're reviewing next week?
Yes. So this is a movie that is on my list of shame. It is maybe one of the biggest movies of the list of shame, simply because I kind of don't know how I got this far into my life without having seen it. Friend of the show, my friend, my old partner in crime, Dan Trachtenberg, has often gotten very heated with me about the fact that I have never seen Lost Boys. So we're gonna rectify that situation. I'm going to watch Lost Boys for the first time. Dave and Devindra
Jeff. It's
the
Lost
Lost Boys, Jeff.
The Lost Boys.
Come on. Come
The
on.
Lost
This
Boys.
is off to a bad start already, but okay.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about it. I know there's vampires in Kiefer Sutherland. That's all I know.
There's also a definite article in the title, just FYI.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm excited for the that's I'm gonna see. But Dave and Devindra are gonna revisit the classic Joel Schumacher, The Lost Boys.
That's going to be our review on the Slash Filmcast next week. The Lost Boys. We'll try to have a fun guest on for that one. But yep, that's it for today's episode of the Slash Filmcast. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.
Woo, good review.